Revealed as Democrats and Republicans react to intelligence reports that Russia wanted Trump to win. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. President-elect Donald Trump is expected to pick a big oil executive, ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson, to be his nominee for Secretary of State. That expected choice has lawmakers on both sides of the aisle expressing concern about Tillerson's cozy relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And the questioning about Trump's decision is only heightened by reports that the intelligence community is convinced Russia tried to influence the election, and dispute between intelligence agencies and law enforcement over the reported determination by the CIA that Vladimir Putin's cyber team was working to see Trump win. Senior national correspondent John Roberts reports on the Trump transition tonight from outside Trump Tower in New York. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. The president-elect was on offense again today against intelligence agency claims that Russian hackers were working to get him elected, dismissing those analyses as nothing more than political sour grapes. But when it comes to one potential cabinet pick, those intelligence analyses may add an extra measure of scrutiny. Sources tell Fox News that Donald Trump has settled on ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson as his pick for Secretary of State. While an official announcement may still be days away, in an exclusive interview, Trump told Fox News Sunday's Chris Wallace that Tillerson is an influential and impressive candidate for the job.
He's much more than a business executive. I mean, he's a world-class player. And to me, a great advantage is he knows many of the players. And he knows them well. He does massive deals in Russia. He does massive deals for the company.
But Tillerson could face headwinds in his confirmation. Even some Republicans concerned about Tillerson's close business ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Allegations from the CIA that Russian hackers were trying to help Trump win the election drew fire from the president-elect today. Trump tweeting, quote, "Can you imagine if the election results were the opposite and we tried to play the Russia CIA card? It would be called conspiracy theory." On Fox News Sunday, Trump said the whole thing is, quote, ridiculous.
Nobody really knows. And hacking is very interesting. Once they hack, if you don't catch them in the act, you're not going to catch them. They have no idea if it's Russia or China or somebody. It could be somebody sitting in a bed someplace.
Trump's proclamation puts him at odds with many experts in the intelligence community and senior members of his own party who today insisted they support a congressional probe into any possible Russian attempt to influence the election.
The Russians are not our friends. We ought to approach all of these issues on the assumption that the Russians do not wish us well.
It was great to spend time with him today.
It was a great meeting.
With 5 positions in Trump's cabinet left to fill, Trump Tower was a hive of activity today. First to arrive was Carly Fiorina, whose war of words with Trump during the primaries was legendary.
Donald Trump said the following about you, quote, "Look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? Can you imagine that, the face of our next president?"
I think women all over this country heard very clearly what Mr. Trump said.
Today, Fiorina, mentioned as a possible candidate for Director of National Intelligence, was all sweetness and light after her meeting with the president-elect.
It was such an honor to meet with the president-elect. First, I have to say he has really cool stuff in his office. All these athletes have given him this incredible memorabilia. I was particularly taken by Shaq O'Neal's shoe, which is huge. I guess it takes a champion to know a champion.
Donald Trump also met today with West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who is a top contender for Energy Secretary, Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers, who could take over at Interior, Congressman from Montana Ryan Zinke, who could fill a number of different roles, and former Texas Governor Rick Perry, who could be in line for either the energy job or Veterans Affairs Secretary. Brett?
And John, a new title for you starting tonight, Chief White House Correspondent. Congratulations.
Brett, thanks so much. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. The prospect of America's top diplomat being a big oil executive with strong ties to Russia and no government experience has a lot of people here in D.C. on edge. But Rex Tillerson is not just any CEO. Here's Chief Washington Correspondent James Rosen.
Rex Tillerson started out as an engineer with ExxonMobil in 1975, taking the helm of the energy giant 11 years ago.
it's incredibly impressive that Rex Tillerson's been at Exxon for 41 years, employs 70,000 people, is in charge of a $320 billion global corporation that frankly is in 50 countries. We need to stabilize the Middle East, and we need somebody, the fourth highest ranking person in our U.S. government, to go around the world and to advance our U.S. interests.
Under Tillerson's leadership, Exxon has backed a carbon tax and the Paris Climate Accord that Donald Trump has vowed to walk away from. Tillerson has written in favor of the Common Core and donated this year to Jeb Bush. And in March, he expressed interest in doing business under the right conditions with Iran. But it is Tillerson's long ties to Moscow that are occasioning concern. By some estimates, no American except Henry Kissinger has had more face time with Vladimir Putin, who has known the Texas native for more than 2 decades and who in 2013 awarded him the Russian Federation's Order of Friendship Medal. A leading Senate Democrat suggested Tillerson's nomination would be in keeping with Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric.
It's obvious he likes Russia, and that's fairly concerning to the world, and certainly concerning to Americans, concerning to me.
At the same time, Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida tweeted, "Being a friend of Vladimir is not an attribute I'm hoping for from a Secretary of State." And Arizona Senator John McCain, the party's former nominee, also expressed misgivings.
When he gets the Friendship Award from a butcher, frankly, it's an issue that I think needs to be examined. And again, that does not mean we should prejudge Mr. Tillerson.
One of the earliest tests Tillerson would face as Secretary of State would be whether to extend sanctions on Russia imposed after the Kremlin's annexation of Crimea, and also, Brett, placating those European allies if and when Donald Trump should try to weaken or nullify the Iran nuclear deal.
All right, James, thank you. President-elect Trump is saying that he may not want to get an intelligence briefing every day. It is his latest departure from convention as he prepares to take the oath of office next month. And like so many other things, it has the Washington intelligentsia, like Republicans did 8 years ago, pulling their hair out. Correspondent Kevin Corke has more tonight from the White House.
When asked about receiving the presidential daily briefing, President-elect Donald Trump told Fox News Sunday's Chris Wallace he's getting them, just not every day.
But I don't need to be told, Chris, the same thing every day, every morning, same words. Sir, nothing has changed. Let's go over it again. I don't need that.
Instead, Trump said the retired generals he's nominated for his cabinet, James Mattis as Secretary of Defense and John Kelly as Secretary of Homeland Security, are being briefed, as is Vice President-elect Mike Pence. But that approach is seemingly at odds with his previous comments about President Obama's daily briefing habits. Trump tweeting, "Priorities. While fundraising and campaigning on our dime, Obama has skipped over 50% of his intel briefings." And fact, Obama does not read his intelligence briefings, nor does he get briefed in person by the CIA or DOD. Too busy, I guess. President Obama sometimes reads the presidential daily briefing on his iPad and has altered his public schedule to reflect in-person updates.
In order to make good decisions, a president has to have access to good information. And by good information, I mean information that is accurate, that is up to date, that is presented clearly.
The PDB, as it's known inside the White House, is a compilation of high-level intelligence findings put together overnight by a team working out of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. It lets the president review a host of topics and threats, both at home and abroad. Critics say it's more than just a tradition dating back nearly 60 years. Not only has the speed of information and the method of dissemination changed, the need to be up to date is now more critical than ever. And his argument is essentially that intelligence changes so rapidly and so frequently that a president has to be fully engaged, and not just through his team. But as you also heard, the president-elect said, "Look, I trust my team and I'm immediately available should details warrant." Brett?
Kevin Corke live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. A federal judge in Pennsylvania has rejected the effort by Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein for a recount in that state. He says suspicion of a hacked Pennsylvania election, quote, borders on the irrational. Late this afternoon, the state certified its vote totals. Another federal judge halted Michigan's recount last week. The Wisconsin recount ended today, with Donald Trump's win there not only reaffirmed, but he actually gained 162 votes in Wisconsin. Even without the specific answers about the severity and damage from cyber attacks during the election, the digital threat to the U.S. government is not going away anytime soon. Tonight, we take an exclusive look at the NSA team tasked with stopping it. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has our story.
Are U.S. systems attacked every day and multiple times a day?
Yes, they are attacked, probably thousands of times a day.
The NSA's Kurt Dukes and his team have tackled some of the biggest cyber crises in the past 2 years. From China's breach of the Office of Personnel Management, where 21.5 million records were stolen, to North Korea's physical destruction of Sony's computer networks, and now Russia.
Adversaries are exploiting areas where we never really saw them attack before.
This is an elite group that works with FBI investigators and Homeland Security.
They understand how to configure technology and what technology is required to really keep adversaries out and keep information secure. These are like the special forces of cybersecurity.
In November, the NSA director said the election hacks were not an accident.
This was not a target that was selected purely arbitrarily. This was a conscious effort by a nation state to attempt to achieve a specific effect.
Dukes could not go beyond that statement, but emphasized Russia uses cyber for both defense and offense.
That may be to get to certain intelligence that they can't get any other way. They may use it to counter a narrative that's currently anti-Russian.
The team also secures information on the battlefield, where the mission is deeply personal.
Every day, we support this country. Sorry.
That's okay. In Afghanistan, the NSA helped dismantle an IED network that killed 9 service members in 2013.
It absolutely is a very human feeling for us to be able to support our warfighter.
The looming cyber threat may require bundling FBI, Homeland Security, and Defense Department capabilities.
For the incoming administration, what recommendations would you give them?
I think that you need to collapse all 3 of those together into one organization where we can be more responsive.
And late today, tension between Capitol Hill and the intelligence community escalated, with the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, sending a letter to the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. Clapper testified in mid-November that they lack strong evidence connecting the Russian government cyber attacks to the WikiLeaks disclosures. Congressman Nunes has called for a classified briefing from the CIA and FBI to deconflict these accounts no later than Friday this week. Brett.
Interesting. Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's looking forward to discussing the Iran nuclear deal with President Donald Trump. Both men have been highly critical of the agreement. The statement comes as the U.S. sends 2 of its brand new state-of-the-art, super expensive fighter jets to Israel. Correspondent John Huddy has that story tonight from Jerusalem.
With a roar, 2 F-35 stealth fighters landed at Nevatim Air Force Base in southern Israel, a grand and ferocious entrance.
It is extremely loud, but this is the moment that we've all been waiting for.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter attended tonight's ceremony, part of his final Middle East visit. He said the U.S. and Israel will dominate the skies together with the F-35s.
The U.S.-Israel defense relationship is stronger than it's ever been.
The 2 F-35s are the first of what will be 50 total in Israel's Air Force by the year 2022. At a cost of nearly $100 million each, Israel's F-35 program has been politically contentious. Today, President-elect Donald Trump criticized the U.S.'s $400 billion F-35 program, tweeting that it's out of control. Shares of Lockheed Martin, the jet's designer, dropped more than 4% after that tweet, roughly a $4 billion loss.
Since 2010, when the technical rebaseline took place, we haven't asked for another day or another dollar for this program. We're delivering on time.
We talked to one of the Israeli pilots who gave his name as Captain R. Israeli pilots don't give their full names or show their faces on camera for security reasons. He said the technology is superior to anything he's flown before.
It can reach further inside a threatened area compared to F-16 without being discovered or without being threatened. I'm willing to test my skills.
He and the other Israeli pilots will start their live training in the cockpit tomorrow as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu takes a look at the F-35. He added earlier in his speech that it advances Israel's military technology into the future. Brett.
John, thank you. China is expressing its displeasure over a statement by President-elect Donald Trump questioning the need for America's so-called One China policy. It started with Trump's acceptance of a congratulatory call from Taiwan's president on December 2nd. The Obama administration quickly chimed in, saying it fully supports the policy, recognizing the communist Beijing government as the official China. Then came indications from the Trump team that the call was actually something that had been planned for months as a deliberate move to shake things up on the policy front. Those indications were downplayed by Trump's senior advisor Kellyanne Conway that same day, saying it was, quote, just a phone call at this point. And yesterday on Fox News Sunday, President-elect Trump further muddied the waters of this timeline. Senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palkot tells us how the apparent shift is being received around the world.
China reacting swiftly to comments regarding the long-held protocol of recognizing Beijing while maintaining only unofficial ties with Taiwan, made by President-elect Donald Trump on Fox News Sunday.
I don't know why we have to be bound by a one China policy unless we make a deal with China, having to do with other things, including trade.
A spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry saying the government has serious concerns. Government-linked newspaper went further, saying while Trump was a businessman through and through, in the field of diplomacy, he is ignorant as a child. Regional experts warn against any strengthening of ties with Taiwan, like Trump's phone call with the Taiwanese president earlier this month. In the words of one, that could grossly destabilize U.S.-China relations. The White House weighed in today on the risks of changing approach.
Disrupting this policy could have a disruptive effect on our ability to work with China in those areas where our interests do align.
Still others say China has been so uncooperative on so many fronts, from unfair trade practices to allowing a nuclear buildup in North Korea to the seizure of territory in the South China Sea, that the U.S.-China relationship and our dealings with Taiwan deserves a shakeup.
He did exactly the right thing. Taiwan is an independent nation. Listen, somebody's got to stand up to China also, which, again, this administration has not done.
Most experts are in agreement that the U.S.-China relationship is worth a relook. It's just that most expected President-elect Trump to wait to do that Chinese relook once he became president. Brett.
Greg Palkot, thank you. Our 15-part series looking at the first 100 days of the Donald Trump presidency focuses tonight on trade with China. Correspondent Dan Springer in Seattle looks at what candidate Trump promised and who could end up paying the price.
And he's right on. The time for Trump is now. And it's either now or never.
Peter Gigante was an early supporter of Donald Trump's, almost entirely based on one issue: trade with China.
We're giving things away. It's the greatest theft in the history of mankind. It is. I felt that way for a long time, and nobody's done anything about it.
Gigante has a unique perspective on the U.S.-China relationship. He lived in the port city of Qingdao 8 years, developing a business park and importing foreign goods. It's where he met his wife Joanna and raised their daughter Lucy. In 2010, he moved to Bellingham, Washington, where he began exporting, among other things, Alaskan fish and timber to China. He says the playing field has never been level. China puts tariffs up to 30% on U.S. fish, while their fish comes here duty-free.
By pegging their currency to our dollar and manipulating their currency, they basically are grabbing us by the nose and kicking us in the rump.
They haven't played by the rules. And I know it's time that they're going to start. They're going to start. They've got to.
During the campaign, Trump said he would label China a currency manipulator, back out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, and hit Chinese imports with tariffs up to 45%. All needed, Trump says, to correct a $356 billion trade imbalance with China.
The nation of China is responsible for almost half of America's trade deficit.
The tough talk has many in the U.S. worried about a full-blown trade war. According to the Pacific Maritime Association, 40% of all cargo at our ports is coming from or going to China. Andy Wilson, vice chairman of the Washington State China Relations Council, has helped that relationship grow.
The beauty of what's happened, or the strength of what's happened over the last number of decades, is we have interdependent economies. We trade both ways. The downside of that is there is pain that can be inflicted both ways.
Washington State, with its agriculture and aerospace industries, is more dependent on trade with China than any other state. So far this year, $26 billion worth of goods has passed through the port of Seattle, fueled by Boeing, which now exports a quarter of all its commercial planes to China, a market expected to grow by $1 trillion over the next 20 years. The American plane maker seemed well positioned after hosting China's President Xi Jinping last year in Seattle. But many analysts expect Boeing to be the first victim of China's retaliation if tensions escalate.
The Chinese government has a long history of using aircraft orders as reward or punishment, depending on the political peak that they have at the time.
Other potential losers, apple and cherry growers. And in the Midwest, states like Michigan and Wisconsin that turned from blue to red, car sales could hit a roadblock.
So it would be absolutely devastating for businesses and workers if we were to continue on a trade war route.
But Donald Trump's transition team leader on trade used to run a major U.S. steel company and says there already is a trade war. In his blog, Dan D'Amico writes, Trump will end the attacks by negotiating from a position of strength, not condescending weakness. China respects strength, but takes full advantage of weakness. In the end, it will be in China's best interest to stop cheating on trade. Last week, Trump picked for his ambassador to China, Iowa Governor Terry Branstad, a man who has a solid 30-year relationship with President Xi and is perhaps Trump's good cop.
We're going to have mutual respect. We're going to have mutual respect. And China's going to benefit, and we're going to benefit.
Peter Gigante, for one, can't wait for Trump's first 100 days.
He's a pretty tough negotiator. I mean, he starts by pushing his opponent to the far end of the field, and then he'll start working his way back. Where he finally settles, nobody knows.
A trade showdown that could reshape the world's biggest economies. In Seattle, Dan Springer, Fox News.
Tomorrow, we'll examine what President-elect Trump has said and could do about American energy and infrastructure. If you miss any of the reports, you can check them all out on foxnews.com/special report. This is a Fox News alert. A transition source, Trump transition source, telling Fox News tonight President-elect Trump is delaying until January an announcement regarding severing ties with his businesses. Transition sources say that there's way too much going on with cabinet picks to wedge the business press conference in. They say it will likely happen in the first week of January, with one source adding, quote, "We were trying to get it all done, but we bit off more than we can chew. Delaying it is not a big deal. We'll get it done." Over on Wall Street today, stocks were mixed. The Dow gained 40 today. It is the 15th record close since Election Day. The S&P 500 lost 3. The Nasdaq dropped 32. Speaking of big money and big business, a lot of people in the financial sector are hoping President Donald Trump keeps his promise to roll back many of President Obama's hundreds of regulations that they feel have been a drain on the U.S. economy. Tonight, Fox Business Network senior Washington correspondent Peter Barnes looks at what Republicans are hoping for and what may be realistic.
We'll be reducing regulations. Now, those are the nice ways of doing it, and everyone loves it, and everyone's happy. Businesses, way down. Also middle class, but way down. Okay, taxes and regulations.
President-elect Donald Trump continues his support for cutting regulation to boost the economy. Estimates of the annual cost of regulation run from tens of billions of dollars from the Obama administration to $2 trillion, according to one private study. One measure of regulation is the Federal Register, the official publication for all government rules. Under President Obama, it swelled nearly 30%, from about 69,000 pages to nearly 90,000.
I would say 70% of the regulations can go. It's just stopping businesses from growing.
As a candidate, Mr. Trump targeted numerous Obama regulations, including under Obamacare, the Clean Power Plan, the Clean Water Rule, the Fracking Rule, and Dodd-Frank financial regulations. Mr. Trump will be able to repeal some Obama rules by executive order the day he takes office, but others may take longer to undo.
The president-elect will have to have a 100-minute agenda and then a 100-day agenda. You know, it takes a long time to make a rule, and guess what? It takes a long time to unmake a rule, too. You have to go through the same notice and comment period. But on the other hand, he could get Congress to simply legislate.
Just last month, the administration defended its regulations, saying it is, quote, committed to ensuring that regulations are smart and effective, that they are tailored to advance statutory goals in the most cost-effective and efficient manner, and that they minimize uncertainty. And And just as critics of Mr. Obama's regulations repeatedly went to court to block them, critics of Mr. Trump could go to court to block him from repealing those regulations, forcing more deregulation delays. Brett?
Peter, thank you. President-elect Donald Trump getting ready to choose a big oil executive, Rex Tillerson, for Secretary of State. And like much of the news lately, it all seems to come back to Russia. We'll ask the panel about it all when we come back.
They have no idea if it's Russia or China or somebody. It could be somebody sitting in a bed someplace. Democrats are putting it out because they suffered one of the greatest defeats in the history of politics in this country. Personally, it could be Russia.
He called on Russia to hack Secretary Clinton. So he certainly had a pretty good sense of whose side this activity was coming down on.
I think we ought to approach all of these issues on the assumption that the Russians do not wish us well.
A reaction to the intelligence reports suggesting that Russia not only interfered in the election, or tried to, but also wanted Donald Trump to win. Donald Trump tweeting out this weekend, "Can you imagine if the election results were the opposite and we tried to play the Russia CIA card? It would be called conspiracy theory." Continuing, "Unless you catch hackers in the act, it is very hard to determine who was doing the hacking and why wasn't this brought up before the election." Speaking of the election, the Clinton team now saying they want the electors to learn about all the intelligence involved here. John Podesta saying electors have a solemn responsibility under the Constitution, and we support their efforts to have their questions addressed. This is not a partisan issue, and we're glad to see bipartisan support in Congress for an investigation into Russia's role. We believe that the administration owes it to the American people to explain what it knows regarding the extent and manner of Russia's interference, and this be done as soon as possible. John Podesta with the Clinton folks. With that, let's bring in our panel. Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today. And syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Susan, the importance of the Podesta comment is that the electors meet on December 19th, and they choose how many go to Donald Trump and how many go to Hillary Clinton.
I think there is no actual prospect that this is going to affect what electors do. But it is a sign of how much Democrats and some Republicans think there ought to be some investigation into Russia's attempt at meddling in this election. The fact is, the intelligence agencies are in agreement that there was a Russian effort to meddle in the election. The thing that we don't know that there's a consensus about is whether that was aimed at really electing Donald Trump. But the idea that this is going to somehow affect the outcome of this election, I don't think anybody realistically thinks that's true.
But do you think some, in reporting this and some talking about it, are shorthanding it and saying it could?
I don't think anybody credible is saying that. Yeah. And it sounds to me like maybe John Podesta is trying to have a little fun, because clearly this gets under Donald Trump's skin. We see him reacting very much to the idea that his election wasn't legitimate, which I think goes farther than the actual criticism is going.
I don't think John Podesta is trying to have a little fun. I think that there is this sense, this narrative that the Democrats are trying to push to try to delegitimize the election results. There was a former Hillary campaign advisor on television this morning saying just that. Russia is delegitimizing this election. Americans should be up in arms. So I really think that there is a movement towards the fact, this last-ditch effort to just put that question out there to the electors to say, wait a second here, can Donald Trump really take this oath of office with the Russian hackers? And they're trying to just make that call out to the electors. I don't think it's going to change the outcome, but I do think that they're trying to make this pitch, and they're basing it off the fact that lawmakers back in September, they were criticizing the Obama administration for not taking action on looking into the Russian hacking.
Matt, you had Reince Priebus, the White House Chief of Staff, incoming, say this when asked about all of this back and forth this weekend.
The Russians didn't tell Hillary Clinton to ignore Wisconsin and Michigan, okay? I mean, I know this is this insane analysis. She lost the election because her ideas were bad. She didn't fit the electorate. She ignored states that she shouldn't have, and Donald Trump was the change agent, okay?
Thoughts?
Well, he's right. There are two things we need to separate. One is Russian interference in the campaign, and we know that's the case, and that was the consensus view of the intelligence agencies. What the CIA, through that leaked Washington Post story, was perhaps implying was that Russia may have actually intervened in the election result. The whole target meant to elect Donald Trump. And that, I think, Reince is right in the sense that there are so many other reasons Donald Trump was elected. Think about how the Democrats have been in denial. First, it was Jim Comey handed the election to Donald Trump. Then it was fake news gave the election to Donald Trump. Then it was the Electoral College gave the election to Donald Trump. And now it's, well, the Russian hackers gave the election to Donald Trump. It's not going to hold water.
All right, Charles, in the background here, you have this decision on Secretary of State. And we're being told that Rex Tillerson, the Exxon Mobil CEO, is the choice and could come as soon as tomorrow or the next day. And his ties to Russia are playing high up on Capitol Hill.
I think the reason for that is because of Trump himself. If Trump had not been so friendly, shall we say, to Putin during the campaign, had he not said such good things about him, had he not valued the relationship and spoken offhandedly about working together, it probably wouldn't have been a big liability. But people are thinking, well, Trump is a novice. He's coming into an international arena where he's been a spectator. You would want a Secretary of State who would guide him, who would have experience. You might say, for example, the way Kissinger guided Nixon, who was actually quite experienced. So instead what you're getting is a second novice, meaning somebody without direct foreign policy experience, and somebody who received an order of friendship from a guy who is not our friend. And that's a problem.
I've talked to a number of diplomats who say this was not the ordinary CEO. This is a guy who essentially, ExxonMobil is almost like a nation state. It's so big that they're dealing directly with world leaders.
And we hear from the Trump folks that some really powerful, respected voices are saying Rex Tillerson would be a good nominee, people like Jim Baker and Condoleezza Rice.
Bob Gates.
But it is possible that he could become, his nomination could become a kind of proxy fight on the whole issue of Russia. And I was curious, today we heard from 3 Republican members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee expressing concern about the Russian meddling, saying there ought to be an investigation. That is a sign that that I think the Trump people need to at least pay attention. It'd be hard to block Tillerson from being confirmed, but you could have a debate in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on the confirmation that is not helpful.
I talked to a senior Democrat this weekend, Mercedes, who said the Democrats cannot get apoplectic about every pick. They can only get apoplectic about certain ones if they're going to be effective on Capitol Hill.
Well, I have to say, I think this one, Tillerson, will be the fight that they want to wage in the Senate because
rather than Jeff Sessions or
Jeff Sessions will be a close second. Scott Pruitt will be a close third. But Tillerson, I think that there is that concern from the progressives on his environmental record, on the fact that he's an oil and gas guru. They worry about that. That is, I think, one of their bigger issues. So I think there is that they feel uncomfortable about the fact of pushing forward a candidate or voting in favor of a candidate or a nominee who would be, who basically would be not in favor of the climate change arena.
If the Democrats go after Tillerson on the Russia ties, it will be a delightful festival of hypocrisy. The Russians for 20 years have been as soft on the Russians as you can come. And then all of a sudden they have discovered that the Russians are not our friends. So this is quite a flip-flop. And well, look, the famous moment all of us remember, Obama mocking Romney for saying that the Russians are a big threat. And now all of a sudden they're becoming Cold Warriors. I don't think it's going to look very good.
Not to mention Hillary Clinton's reset button that really wasn't reset in Russian. Matt, I want to ask you about this. Was this stringing Mitt Romney along? Was this all part of a giant scheme, do you think? Or do you think he was really considering Mitt Romney?
Occam's razor's simplest explanation is best. I think Trump actually had a good rapport with Romney and was attracted to the idea of him as Secretary of State. But he saw how it played. And Trump is always looking at how things play with the base and with his audience. And the reaction from the grassroots about Romney, I think, made him look for other names. Mike Pence, Condi Rice led him to Rex Tillerson.
You buy that, Susan?
Yeah, it's so Machiavellian to think that he brought Romney in, maybe the first time, maybe there's a little of that, but when he brought him back a second time, I mean, I guess I take him at his word that he was seriously considering Romney. But one stunning thing, Romney and Tillerson, could two people have more different approaches toward U.S.-Russian relations, and yet those were apparently the two finalists?
Pretty amazing. Next up, why the president-elect does not want the daily intelligence briefing every day, and some perspective on the reaction to it.
You are getting the presidential daily brief only once a week.
Well, I get it when I need it. And I say, if something should change from this point, immediately call me. I'm available on 1 minute's notice. I don't have to be told, you know, I'm like a smart person. I don't have to be told the same thing and the same words every single day for the next 8 years.
It doesn't work that way. Those threats change on a day-to-day basis, with new intelligence, with new sources, with new assets that provide information.
Well, the whole back and forth about getting one presidential daily brief, which the president-elect now gets per week, and having the vice president-elect and others take it day to day, is what he's talking about there. There is this reaction on both sides, but if you go back to Twitter, and they still hold those tweets for a while, September 2012, priorities. While fundraising and campaigning on our dime, Obama has skipped over 50% of his intel briefings. September 2014, fact, Obama does not read his intelligence briefings, nor does he get briefed in person by the CIA or DOD. Too busy, I guess. And then October 2014, Obama has missed 58% of his intelligence briefings, but our president does make 100% of his fundraisers. And you'll remember there was all this uproar on the Republican side about the president getting his briefing on an iPad, which changed after the uproar. We're back with the panel. Mercedes, what about this?
Well, I prefer the George W. Bush model, which is that you get daily briefings and that the president asks the difficult questions to the intelligence officers. I do believe that Trump may move towards that model once he takes the oath of office. I could see that happening. Obviously, he's got very competent generals in place with General Mattis, General Kelly, and as well as Vice President-elect Pence. But things change so rapidly. International crises, situations across the globe. I think it's to the president's benefit, president-elect's benefit, to get that daily briefing every day.
Matt, I mean, to his point, if something has not changed, he doesn't want to hear the same thing again. But from my perspective of knowing what the intel briefs are like, you ask them, I need to know about XYZ, and they come the next day with whatever you need to know. So he could expand, day to day what he's learning about different elements.
Well, I doubt he's going to change his approach, because if there's one thing we know about President-elect Trump is he doesn't change. And if he ran as an outsider who's not going to do things as you or I might expect them to be done. And I think he's going to carry on that approach. However, there's a big political risk for him, which is, as we saw in the lead up to the 9/11 attack, if we have a similar catastrophic attack in this country, and there's the slightest hint of it in a PDB, a daily brief, that the president-elect misses, that could be a big political problem for him. It's an if, but it's something that he should be aware of as he's about to take the oath of office.
Charles.
Look, I think it's clear a president should be able to choose how he gets his information, how often he gets it, and in what form he gets it. Nonetheless, the president is not known for his intellectual curiosity, and the fact that he would, again, he's a novice when it comes to foreign affairs. The fact that he would not want to get the briefings, particularly now, before he's the one who has to make the decisions, is somewhat disturbing, because he's got, almost a month now, a little more than a month actually, until he's sworn in. It's a good time to actually catch up. He's been a businessman. He's not required to have studied the capitals of all the countries in Southeast Asia, but nonetheless, to get a feel for what's going on in the world. So however he decides, it doesn't have to be a daily, it doesn't have to be a briefing, but there's got to be a way in which he educates himself and not delegates. In the end, the decision is going to be his, and that day is arriving pretty soon.
Susan, when you talk to people, they say, hey, listen, he can do it however he wants, and they say, he's got great people around him. And if something is big, he says he'll be there 24 hours a day. That's when you talk to people out in the country and they say, what's the big deal about Washington intelligentsia getting so worked up over this?
Cedes a lot of authority to Mike Pence, who's getting the briefing every day. And I think one of the concerns is that Donald Trump does not have, as of yet, a relationship of trust, I think, in the intelligence agencies. He's been very critical of them, including over the Russia conclusions that they've reached. And of course, the intelligence agencies exist in large part to provide him with the information to make the best possible decisions when there are tough calls. So this lack of a relationship, which would only be exacerbated if he failed to get regular briefings from the intelligence agencies, I think might be something of some long-term concerns. Although I certainly agree, he gets to decide how he wants to learn about things, the way that makes the most sense.
And like President Obama, it could evolve. It could evolve as the job kind of.
I really think that the fact that he hasn't taken the oath of office, I think it could possibly change. And also, you have to remember that presidents all take it in different formats. President Reagan received his briefings mostly through video content. Obviously, we had President Obama using his iPad, and he's going to have to Donald Trump needs to find his comfort zone in terms of how he's going to receive the intelligence.
I want to add one thing about the conversation we had about Russian influence or the investigation into the election. Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, wrote a letter to the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, in which he said, on November 17th, 2016, you told the committee during an open hearing that the intelligence community lacked strong evidence connecting Russian government cyber attacks and WikiLeaks disclosures. The evidence is not strong. We don't have good insight into the sequencing of the releases or the data. We don't have good insight into that, he says. He wants to now call Clapper back up or get some clarification, Matt, about why they now have certainty.
Well, and I don't think the consensus view of the intelligence community is that there is any certainty. What we seem to have is a report from the CIA, one agency out of many that thinks that there was certainty about Russian intent. I will say that Nunes' letter, as well as the response among the senators to this news about Russian hacking, suggests to me that we're going to see a real separation of powers in this administration. Congress is going to assert itself. It's not just going to be a lackey of the White House on crucial issues such as this.
We'll follow it. We got to run.
All right.
Thank you for being here, Susan. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Tucker Carlson Tonight starts right now.